Hey there team, my name is John and welcome back to the channel. If you've been keeping up, well then I'm so proud of you. Seriously. Thank you. We've been in a series the past few weeks called All Things New, where we've been asking the question, how can we make this new year truly new? And as much as this teaching so far, I'm sure has been informative, inspiring, life-changing, it would seem that not everyone in our world has heard it. I mean, already this year we've seen problems all around our world. We see the US on the brink of war yet again. The Bear and the Swan still hasn't come back on the air.
Sorry.
Yeah. It would seem that even though so many of us had so much hope going into this new year, we're really just seeing more of the same. And I'm sure you could even look at your own life and see how you started off this year with so much hope, so much optimism that things would be better. But already, just 4 weeks in, you've already given up on your diet. You've already gone back to that bad relationship. You've already slipped back into that unhealthy habit. It seems that no matter how hard we try, humanity is caught in this cycle of same. But are we hopeless in it? Are we just doomed to repeat the mistakes of our past? Are the negative things that define our lives today destined to define our lives forever? Or is there actually hope for us? Well, that's what we're going to look at today in Ephesians chapter 2. We continue our reading from last week by starting in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 14. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. He came and preached peace to you who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. Last week we discussed how in Jesus the left out are led in. How whether it's Jews and Gentiles in the first century or it's Democrats and Republicans in 2020, Jesus takes the in crowd and the outcasts and brings them into one family. And there are two main reasons why Jesus advocated for this radical type of inclusion in the family of God. First, it's because every single person is made in the image of God. Genesis chapter 1 teaches us that humans are made in the image or likeness of God. This means that 1, we are filled with God's life. We are full of all of who God is. And we represent his life in the world by living in God's ways, living by his design and plan for our lives. According to the Bible, that is what makes up the core of our identity as humans, that human life flourishes under God's ways and God's life. But the second reason for Jesus' commitment to inclusion in the family of God is because every person has sinned. While every person has essentially the same core identity, every person also has the same problem. And that problem is that even though we are made in God's image to represent and reflect him here on earth, each and every one of us constantly falls short of that calling. Again, this is a pattern started in the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 3, man and woman rebelled against God. They exchanged living by God's way for living by their own way. And in doing so, exchanged God's life for their own life, which the Bible actually describes as death. And that essentially is the root of sin. A rejection of God's way and God's life. It is exchanging our true identity as image bearers of God for a false identity as gods of our own. And the Bible tells us that each and every one of us, we all do this. In another letter, Paul even says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." And this is the reason for that cycle of same that we talked about earlier, that because of sin, As much as we try to do the right thing, as much as we try to change because of sin, most of the time we really just see more of the same. Wait a minute, John. I thought you said this wasn't hopeless. Be patient, young one. If you read on from Genesis, you'll see that humanity is essentially locked in this cycle of believing the lie and exchanging God's ways and God's life. Again, waiting for the hope. That is, until an obscure rabbi named Jesus came onto the scene in the first century and began to teach in a way that no one had ever seen before. The way that Jesus was teaching and the life that Jesus was living was totally different than the cycle of same that humanity had been living in and seeing up until that point. He was a man who was actually living out God's way and God's life. And he taught that through his example, we could begin to live not as an old humanity stuck in that cycle of same, but as a new humanity, a renewed humanity. Jesus is the example of new humanity. But not only that, but Jesus also famously claimed, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Jesus' claim is not just that he was teaching God's way and truth and life, but Jesus claimed that he actually was God's way and truth and life, and that through him, all of humanity could experience it as well. And so it actually goes much deeper. Jesus is the example and the experience of new humanity. And we as his followers are called to both follow his example and to experience a new kind of life with God through him. And maybe for some of you watching this video, you've never actually said yes to Jesus' invitation. His invitation to break that cycle of sin, the cycle of same in your life, and instead enter into a brand new way of living with God. And so for you, maybe your next step is to simply say yes. And if that's true for you, I want to highly encourage you to maybe reach out to a friend who is a follower of Jesus, or maybe reach out to a pastor, or even click any of the links in the description below and send me an email. I would love to talk to you about that. But then there are others of you who perhaps have said yes to that invitation, but you need to get really honest with yourself and ask, am I actually following Jesus' example? Am I actually mimicking the ways of Jesus? Does my life look like the life of Jesus? And maybe the next step for you is to get really specific and choose one example, one teaching of Jesus that you are going to commit to applying and living out in your life this week. Because through Jesus, we are not only called to enter into the new humanity, but then we are called to live as the new humanity. Hey team, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel. I know a lot of you perhaps catch a video here and there. If you want to make sure you never miss a video as we continue on in this series, just click that subscribe button and we'll make sure that you always know when there is a new video up. Also, I wanted to shout out again my email list. If you are perhaps interested in diving a little bit deeper into some of the concepts that we talk about here on the channel, or just getting good resources to grow in your relationship with God, to move forward in faith, each and every month I send out just one email with about 3 to 5 books that I have read or am reading that are helping me grow in my faith, and I just want to share them with you as resources that perhaps will help you in your journey with God as well. If you're interested in just one email a month of resources from me, you can click the link in the description down below. That is all I have for you this week. I love you all. Keep being awesome.